The chandeliers of the Newport Beach mansion threw broken light across a 5-tier cake, across champagne flutes, frozen mid-toast, across the diamond, burning quietly on Natalie Harper's left hand. Then Ryan Caldwell lifted the microphone, and his voice fell over the room like cold water. "There's been a small change tonight. The woman I'm going to marry is Amber." Her own sister drifted out of the crowd in a gold silk dress, threaded her arm through his with the ease of a woman, claiming what she had always intended to take. Phones rose. Laughter splintered the air. Carol leaned in close, her whisper sharp as glass. "Don't make a scene in front of everyone." Natalie didn't cry. She walked out into the dark garden alone, and somewhere beyond the laughter, beyond the cameras, a stranger in a worn flannel shirt was already waiting. 6 weeks before the chandeliers shattered her life, Natalie Harper still believed she was going to be a wife. At 29, she was a mid-level accountant at a Newport Beach commercial real estate firm, the kind of woman who balanced spreadsheets and grief with the same quiet efficiency. 9 years earlier, her father had died of a heart condition the family hadn't been able to afford to treat in time. From the night of his funeral on, she had become the steady column holding her mother and younger sister upright, a check, mailed home on the 1st of every month, college tuition covered. Late phone calls answered without complaint. She did not consider herself complicated. She wanted to be honest. She wanted to be steady. She wanted more than anything to be seen for what she was actually worth. Her mother, Carol, widowed and frugal, measured love in practical terms. A good marriage in Carol's vocabulary was the door out of every worry that had ever kept her awake at night. Amber, 3 years younger, and built for attention, had grown up in the long shadow of her older sister, and refused on principle to admit it. To strangers, she was sunshine. At home, her eyes counted what belonged to Natalie. Ryan Caldwell had walked into Natalie's life through a quarterly audit. He was 34, the youngest chief executive in his family's commercial real estate group, with tailored suits and a Range Rover, and a way of speaking that made other men listen. He pursued her patiently. He proposed in a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor and told her, "I want to build a life with you if you'll let me." She had believed him because believing him was easier than the alternative. In the weeks before the engagement party, the easier story began to crack. Ryan grew harder to reach, blaming a development in San Diego. Amber, by contrast, was suddenly everywhere, insisting on coming along to dress fittings, posting cryptic captions, like "a special night is coming," ending phone calls too quickly the moment Natalie walked into her room. One evening, Natalie caught the tail end of one of those calls. "You worry too much," Amber laughed when she pressed. "Relax. You're about to marry rich." Natalie wanted to believe her, so she did. The night of the party, the Newport Beach mansion glowed like a postcard from a life she didn't quite recognize as hers. She wore an emerald gown, soft curls pinned at the nape of her neck, a careful smile she had practiced in the bathroom mirror twice. The chandeliers turned everyone gold. Champagne moved from tray to hand to lip in an unbroken current. Then Ryan tapped the microphone, and the room she had stepped into ceased to be hers. His voice did not rise. That was what would hurt the most, later the steadiness of it, as if he were closing out a quarterly report. "There's been a small change tonight. The woman I'm going to marry is Amber." He went on, every syllable measured. "Amber understands the life I lead. She understands what this position requires." The unspoken half hung in the air, sharp as wire. Natalie did not. Then Amber in gold silk drifted out of the crowd to take his arm. Phones rose like a flock of startled birds. Someone behind Natalie whispered, "Wait, the one in green, that's the bride's sister." A woman she had once called a friend covered her mouth, half shocked, half thrilled. Carol caught Natalie's elbow before her own legs had decided what they were doing, and her whisper landed cold against her ear. "Don't make a scene in front of everyone. Walk out the side. Not, 'Are you all right?' Not, What is he doing? Walk out the side. Natalie walked. The garden stretched dark and salted with sea air, cut only by the low spill of light from the ballroom windows. Inside, the music had already resumed faster now, as if the room were anxious to forget what it had just witnessed. She stopped near the low stone wall at the edge of the lawn, both palms flat against the cold of it, and waited for tears that did not come. A man's footsteps approached over the grass unhurried. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not even look at her face long enough to make her feel watched. He held out a chilled bottle of water, the plain kind condensation already beating along the plastic, and said, "Long night. Drink." He wore a worn flannel shirt and old jeans, the kind of clothes nobody at this party would have been caught dead in. His hair was dark cut without ceremony. His shoes had grass stains on them, as if he had walked there from somewhere real. "Do you work here?" Natalie asked because asking something simple felt like the only handhold left. "No. I came to see someone inside." A small lift of the shoulder. Daniel. Daniel Cole. The name meant nothing to her. He did not seem to expect it to. He set the bottle on the wall beside her hand, gave a small nod that asked nothing in return, and walked back across the lawn the way he had come. Natalie watched him go. The bottle sweated quietly against the stone. She drank it. By morning, the internet had decided what had happened. A guest's phone had captured the exact second Ryan said her sister's name, and the clip was already moving from group chat to group chat, under captions calling it the surprise engagement of the year. Comment threads dissected her dress, her face the particular angle of her body in the moment her world tilted. A close-up showed Carol's hand at her elbow. Strangers wrote essays about a woman they had never met. Natalie sat at her kitchen counter in yesterday's mascara, scrolling without really reading. Her phone rang. Her mother. She let it go to voicemail, then changed her mind on the third try. "You left early," Carol said before hello. "People noticed." Natalie kept her voice flat. "Mom, your sister and Ryan want to come over this afternoon to talk. Get it over with all of us in one room like adults. The longer you wait, the worse it looks." There it was, the worse it looks. Not "Are you hurt?" Not "I'm sorry, sweetheart." The shape of how her mother thought had never been clearer than in those 5 words. "I'm not coming over." "Natalie, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being done." She hung up before her mother could find a softer voice to win her back with. In the bathroom mirror, the woman looking out at her was not the one who had pinned curls into place the night before. The eyes were swollen but dry. The mouth was set in a way Natalie did not yet have a name for. Underneath the pain, something colder and sharper had begun to take its place. A clean, deliberate kind of anger that did not shout, did not weep, did not beg an explanation from anyone. She could not control what Ryan had done. She could not control what would be said in every kitchen and every group chat in Newport Beach by the end of the week. She could not control whether her own mother loved her or merely managed her. What she could control was who she was going to be after this. She washed her face. She made coffee strong enough to taste in her teeth. She slid the diamond off her left hand, set it on the counter for one long look, and dropped it into a drawer she had no plans to open again. Somewhere on the other side of the city, a man in a worn flannel shirt was getting his 7-year-old son ready for school. He had no idea yet that the woman he had handed a bottle of water to in a stranger's garden would, before the year was out, be standing across from him in a county courthouse in a dress bought off a Target rack, saying yes to a question he hadn't yet known how to ask, and Natalie sliding her drawer shut on a diamond, and a life that had cost her too much did not know yet either. She only knew that whatever came next, she was going to walk into it standing up. The phone call came on the 3rd day. Her supervisor's voice carried the particular discomfort of a man delivering news he had not chosen. "Natalie, come into my office for a minute." She already knew before she sat down. Ryan Caldwell had reached out to senior leadership, not directly, never directly, but through the kind of softened phrasing wealthy men used when they wanted something done. A concern about conflict of interest, a suggestion that her continued presence might complicate the firm's ongoing contracts with the Caldwell Group. "It's not a termination," her supervisor said, and would not meet her eyes. "It's an indefinite leave." She cleaned out her desk in 20 minutes. 2 co-workers found reasons to be elsewhere. A third, a woman she had once split a hotel room with at a finance conference, gave her a hug that already felt like an apology to a stranger. By the end of the week, the silence had spread. Group texts went quiet when she joined them. Friends she shared with Ryan and Amber stopped suggesting brunch. Her resume went out to 12 firms in the first 10 days. The replies were uniform in their politeness. "We'll be in touch. We're keeping your information on file. We're going in a different direction at this time." In a city where her professional reputation had taken 9 years to build 3 sentences from a man at a microphone, had taken it apart in a single evening. Then came the flowers. A delivery driver buzzed her apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, a vast spray of white roses and lilies wrapped in cream paper, the kind of arrangement that cost more than her last grocery bill. Tucked in among the stems was a cream envelope, with her name written across it in a handwriting she had once thought she loved. The letter was short. Ryan's words were soft, the way a man speaks when he is trying very hard to sound reasonable, coming as a small token toward what's been a difficult situation. Sometimes life pushes us in different directions. "I still care about your future, Natalie. I would hate to see a smart woman struggle when a fresh start in another city could put all of this behind you." Folded behind the letter was a check made out to her in the amount of $50,000. A second sheet of paper, more lawyerly than the first, suggested that her acceptance would come paired with a simple agreement, discretion, regarding the personal matters between them, in exchange for which Ryan would be glad to make introductions in San Francisco or Seattle. She read it twice. She read it a third time because the first 2 had not been enough to convince her the words on the page were real. Then she tore the check straight down the middle. She tore it again and again until the pieces were small enough to drop back into the envelope. She slid the letter in on top of the shredded paper, sealed the envelope, and wrote across the front in steady block letters, "Return to sender." She walked it down to the mailbox on the corner that same evening in jeans and an old cardigan, and dropped it through the slot without ceremony. That night, in the long quiet of her apartment, she finally understood the shape of what Ryan wanted. He did not want peace. He did not want her closure or her well-being or her eventual forgiveness. He wanted her gone out of Newport Beach, out of his social map, out of the rooms, where her existence might remind anyone of how he had behaved. Refusing $50,000 in a kitchen with overdue rent on the counter was the first decision in months that felt entirely her own. 2 Saturdays later, she was sitting in a small neighborhood coffee shop she had walked past for years, without entering a folder of fresh resumes open in front of her, when a familiar voice said her name. Natalie Harper. The man from the garden stood at the counter with 2 paper cups in one hand and a small boy tugging at the other. He wore a different flannel green this time, equally worn, and the same kind of plain jeans, the same air of having walked there from somewhere real. "Daniel," she said. The name came back to her without effort. "You came to see someone that night." "I did." A small, dry smile. "This is my son, Mason." The boy was maybe 7 with serious dark eyes and a chipped front tooth. He looked at Natalie with the unedited frankness of children. "Are you sad?" Mason asked. "You look kind of sad." A laugh broke out of her before she could stop it, startled, almost shy. It was the first time she had laughed in nearly a month. Daniel slid into the seat across from her, without being invited, set the second coffee on her side of the table, and said, "We do Saturdays here." He did not ask about the engagement party. He did not ask why she was alone in a coffee shop with a folder of resumes on a Saturday morning. He talked about the weather, about Mason's reading project, about how the man behind the counter always cut the cinnamon rolls a little crooked. She found slowly that she could breathe. In the weeks that followed, the Saturdays stacked up on each other quietly. Daniel said he did consulting, small projects, freelance nothing that needed an office. He had been raising Mason alone for the last 4 years, since his wife had died in a car accident on Pacific Coast Highway. He drove an old blue Ford pickup that he parked at the edge of the lot and never bothered to lock. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, the words cost him something never wasted, never decorative. Mason, on the other hand, talked to Natalie like she had always been there. He showed her his loose teeth. He asked for her phone number on the 3rd Saturday, so he could call her if anything important happened, and she gave it to him without thinking. The first call came on a Wednesday night just before 10. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end was Daniel's, but stripped down, quieter than usual, edged with something she had never heard in him before. Mason's fever spiked. "Hogue emergency room. He's asking for you." She did not ask why. She did not ask whether she was the right person for him to be calling. She grabbed a sweater and her keys and was in a rideshare within 4 minutes. At the hospital, she found them in a curtained bay near the back. Daniel sat on a low stool beside the bed, a paperback open on his knee, his thumb still holding his place. Mason was small under the white sheet. Hair, damp cheeks flushed too red. When he turned his head and saw her in the doorway, his hand lifted weakly off the blanket, and his voice was a thread. "You came. I knew you would." She did not stay because anyone asked her to. She stayed because the idea of leaving did not occur to her. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, the fever broke. Daniel finally let his shoulders drop against the wall behind him, eyes closed, the paperback face down across his thigh. Mason slept with one small hand wrapped around 2 of Natalie's fingers. In the gray light of the parking lot the next morning, Daniel walked her to her car. He stopped before she opened the door, looked at her with something tired and unguarded in his face, and said, "Thank you." 4 years. That's the first time I haven't done one of those nights alone. She did not have a clean answer for him. She nodded, got in the car, and drove home with her hands shaking on the wheel, not from fear, but from the recognition of something she had not been looking for. 2 weeks later, the 12th rejection email arrived. She read it standing at her kitchen counter in the same spot where she had once dropped a diamond into a drawer. "We regret that we are unable to move forward at this time." The same gentle phrasing, the same closed door. She closed the laptop and opened her phone instead, and the algorithm, kind as a knife, served her a photograph of Amber at a bridal salon in Costa Mesa, half turned in front of a 3-way mirror, smiling at the camera in the very dress Natalie had once put a deposit down on and walked away from. She did not cry then. She got dressed. She drove to the coffee shop. She had not called Daniel. He arrived anyway 20 minutes after she sat down at the corner table by the window. She did not ask how he had known. He set a cup of black coffee in front of her, slid into the seat across from her, and said nothing. The tears came after the 3rd sip, quiet at first, and then less so. Daniel pushed a folded napkin across the table toward her hand. He did not reach for her. He did not tell her it would be all right. What he said low enough that no one else in the small room could hear was, "You don't have to be strong with me." She cried for 10 minutes. He sat through every one of them without flinching, without filling the silence with anything she would later have to forgive him for. When she could speak again, her voice was hoarse and steadier than she expected. "I don't know what I'm doing, Daniel." "You're doing the next thing," he said. "That's all anyone gets to do." The phone call from her mother came a week after that. Carol's voice was wound tight. "The Caldwells are planning a winter wedding. The local paper ran a piece. People are looking at this family differently, Natalie. You need to do something." She did not have to ask what something meant. In her mother's vocabulary, it meant find another man fast and make sure everyone sees him. It meant prove you weren't the loss in this story. She told Daniel about the call the next Saturday at their corner table. He listened the way he listened to everything, with the whole of his attention, no part of him already drafting his answer. When she finished, he set his cup down carefully and asked her something she had not been ready for. "What do you want, Natalie, for your life? Forget your mother. Forget the Caldwells. What do you want?" She thought for a long time before she answered. "I want peace. I want to be respected. I want to be looked at like an equal, not like an accessory, not like a name on someone's business card." He took that in. Outside the window, a young father with a stroller passed by on the sidewalk. A bus hissed at the corner. Then Daniel said very quietly, "Marry me." Natalie almost laughed. She almost asked him if he had lost his mind. What stopped her was his face, the absence of any grin, any uncertainty, anything that looked like a joke being walked back. "I'm not saying it out of pity," he said. "I'm not saying it to prove anything to anyone. I'm saying it because in 3 months, I haven't seen anyone who deserves to be treated better than you. And because Mason needs someone like you in his life." "So do I." She studied him across the table, the same worn flannel, the same plain face, the same steadiness she had been leaning on without admitting it. Then she asked the only honest question she had left. "Who are you really, Daniel?" He held her gaze. "I'll tell you. After you answer me." There was no manipulation in it, no flicker of pride, only the same quiet that had handed her a bottle of water in a stranger's garden on the worst night of her life. She said yes. The Orange County courthouse 2 weeks later had the smell of old paper and floor wax. She wore a simple white dress she had bought off a clearance rack at a Target in Costa Mesa and a pair of low heels she already owned. Daniel wore a navy button-down shirt without a tie. Mason stood between them in the only suit he owned, a small one from a cousin's christening, holding a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked that morning from the park behind the apartments. Their witnesses were Daniel's elderly next-door neighbor, the courthouse clerk, and a woman from the records office who had clearly seen many such ceremonies and still smiled at this one. The whole thing took 12 minutes. When the officiant told Daniel he could kiss his bride, he did so once lightly, like a man making a promise rather than a performance. On the courthouse steps, Mason looked up at her hair sticking up in the back, where his father had missed a comb stroke, and asked, "Are you my mom now?" Nobody had a clean answer for him. Nobody wanted to say no. The world that did not know her saw a different story. Natalie Harper, the woman who had been left at the microphone, had married some quiet single father with no name, no money, no following. A man with an old truck and a child and a flannel shirt. The internet, when it noticed it all, called it a downgrade. Carol called once and could not bring herself to congratulate her own daughter. Amber said nothing. 2 months into the marriage, Natalie took a position at a small logistics firm just inside the Irvine line. The owner was a tired, decent man whose finances had been a tangle for years. She rebuilt his accounting from the ground up, flagged a billing leak that had been bleeding the company for 8 quarters, redesigned the cash flow model, and saved the firm more in 6 weeks than her annual salary. Then the letter came. It arrived by certified courier on a Thursday. The letterhead belonged to one of the most expensive intellectual property firms in Southern California. The complaint, dressed up in careful language, claimed that Natalie was using a proprietary financial model developed during her employment at her previous firm, a firm under contract with the Caldwell Group. Response required within 10 days. Failure to respond would result in formal litigation against both her and her new employer. Her boss at the logistics firm went ashen when she set the letter on his desk. She read the complaint 3 times in her car before she drove home. The legal grounds were thin. Anyone who had actually built a financial model from scratch could see the differences in methodology, but thin was not the same as harmless. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, would gut a small company in attorney's fees within months. The owner would settle. He would have no choice. and the settlement would carry her name on it into every search result, into every future job interview. She brought the letter home and laid it on the kitchen table. Daniel read it once slowly, the way he read everything. He did not look surprised. He did not look afraid. When he finished, he set the pages down and said, "This complaint is weak." "What do you know about intellectual property law?" The question came out sharper than she meant it. He looked up at her with an expression she could not entirely place. "Enough to know about this." He spent the next 2 days at the kitchen table with his laptop and a yellow legal pad, working with a focus that did not match anything she had ever seen him do for consulting on small projects. He pulled archived emails from her old firm emails she didn't remember saving some of them from, before she had ever heard of the Caldwell Group, and built a timeline so clean it read like a finished argument. He documented Ryan's pattern, the firing, the social isolation, the $50,000 check returned to sender, and now this, and arranged it the way a prosecutor arranges evidence. On the night before the deadline, he sealed the response in a plain manila envelope and wrote a single name on the front, the addressee at the law firm. He set the envelope by the door for the courier in the morning. "Trust me," he said. He kissed the top of her head and went down the hall to check on Mason. Natalie stood alone in the kitchen long after the apartment had gone still. She thought about the phone call last week that he had taken on the balcony voice, dropping into a register she did not recognize. She thought about the slim financial folder she had glimpsed in his desk drawer, the one whose company name she had not heard before and had not asked about. She thought about the way he read legal documents, not like a man learning, but like a man remembering. She thought about Mason saying once between bites of cereal Daddy used to have lots of offices. The man who had just sealed an envelope at her kitchen table either knew exactly what he was doing or was about to ruin both of their lives by pretending to. Outside, somewhere past the 10-day clock that had already started ticking, Ryan Caldwell had a team of lawyers, a building full of staff, and a great deal of money. Daniel had a yellow legal pad and an old Ford in the parking lot. For the first time since the night in the garden, Natalie was not sure which one of them she had bet her life on. The lawyer who opened the envelope on the morning of the 10th day was the most expensive litigator on the Caldwell Group payroll, and he had opened thousands of envelopes in his career. He read this one twice before he stood up. He read it a third time on the elevator ride to Ryan Caldwell's office. The response itself was clean, a clinical dismantling of the complaint supported by a timeline of original work product so well archived that contesting it in court would cost a fortune and almost certainly lose. That was not what made the lawyer's hands cold. What made his hands cold was the signature block on the final page. Daniel Cole, Executive Chairman, Cole Capital Group. Ryan was on a call when his lawyer walked in without knocking. He read the signature line, and then he read it again. And then he sat very still in his ergonomic chair, while a sound left his throat that was almost a laugh. Cole Capital Group was not a name that needed introduction in any boardroom on the West Coast. The firm controlled a commercial real estate portfolio that stretched from Boston to San Diego office towers, logistics campuses, mixed-use developments. Among the buildings on its books was the 17-story tower in Irvine that housed the entire Caldwell Group corporate operation on a lease that came up for renewal in 14 months. If Daniel Cole chose not to renew, Ryan would have 60 days to relocate every desk, every server, every employee to a new building in a market where Cole Capital owned roughly a third of the comparable inventory. The board met that afternoon. The instruction to outside counsel went out before the close of business. The intellectual property complaint was withdrawn, not negotiated, not narrowed, withdrawn. And a written apology was attached on Caldwell letterhead, signed by Ryan himself. Natalie's phone rang while she was at her desk at the logistics firm. It was the owner. His voice cracked with relief. They dropped it. The whole thing. They dropped it. He kept saying it 2 different ways, as if he didn't trust the silence on her end of the line. She thanked him quietly. She stood up. She walked out to her car in the parking lot, and only when she was sitting behind the wheel with the door closed did she dial the number she had memorized 2 months earlier, without meaning to. Daniel picked up on the second ring. His voice was tired and even. "Come to the park," he said. "The one Mason likes. I'm here with him." She drove there in the kind of silence that has no music in it. He was sitting on the bench beneath the big coastal oak at the far end of the playground, the one Mason had claimed as his own months ago. Mason was a small, bright shape in the distance, climbing the rope ladder of the play structure lost in his own world. Daniel had a paper coffee cup in one hand. He did not get up when Natalie crossed the grass toward him. He waited. She did not sit. "Tell me," she said. He did. The shape of it came out plainly with no decoration. He had inherited Coal Capital Group from his father at 28. The night his wife was killed by a drunk driver on Pacific Coast Highway, he stood in a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning and realized he could no longer remember the last real conversation they had had, only the last calendar invitation, the last donor dinner, the last quarterly. He had tried after that to keep going. He had run the company for another 2.5 years, raising Mason between board meetings and press calls, telling himself the work would carry him through the grief. What he noticed eventually was that Mason had begun to look at him the way employees did politely from a distance. 18 months ago, he had finally broken. He named a chairman of the board he trusted, kept his title and a controlling stake, and walked out of the office. For the 18 months that followed, he had been raising Mason in a rented apartment in a working neighborhood of Newport Beach, in old jeans and old trucks, in the company of people who had no idea who his family was. It had given him back something he had been losing for years. He had not planned to come out of it for anyone. When he finished, the silence between them held the sound of Mason laughing somewhere across the playground. Natalie did not melt. She did not weep. She walked away from the bench 3 steps and stopped with her back to him at the edge of the woodchip path. When she turned around again, her voice was level enough to cut glass. "You let me face Ryan for 10 days thinking I was about to lose everything I had just rebuilt." Daniel did not look away. "I did. You let me marry you without knowing who I was marrying." "I did. You let me introduce you to my mother as a man with nothing." "Yes." She studied him from where she stood. He did not defend himself. He did not produce reasons. The absence of any defense was in a strange way the only thing that stopped her from leaving. "Why?" she said finally. "Why not tell me at the start?" He set the coffee cup down on the bench beside him. When he answered her, he was not looking at the playground or the grass or the tree. He was looking at her, because I needed to know why you were choosing me, not the company, not a way out of what Ryan did to you, not a story you could tell your mother to put her at ease. A muscle moved in his jaw. My first wife I never knew, all the way down. I never knew if she loved Daniel or if she loved the coal name. I told myself it didn't matter because she was good to me. After she died, I realized it had been quietly killing something in me for years. I couldn't do that twice. His voice dropped. You chose me when I was the man with the old Ford and the 7-year-old and nothing else on paper. That's the man I wanted to be chosen as. She heard him out. She did not answer right away. She watched Mason swing across the monkey bars, drop into the sand, sprint back toward the rope ladder for another loop. The same boy she had sat beside in a hospital bay until 2 in the morning. The same boy whose small fingers had wrapped around hers in his sleep. None of that at least had been a lie. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "I need time, Daniel. Not to leave. To forgive. Take it," he said. "However long. I'll be where I've been." Mason came running up before either of them could say anything else, pink-cheeked and breathless, wood chips in his sneakers. He looked from his father's face to Natalie's, and whatever he read, there was enough. "Did you tell her?" he asked his father with the gravity of a small judge. Are we a real family now? Natalie put her hand on top of his head, light, and her smile was tired, but it was real. We're working on it, kiddo. Okay, Mason said, satisfied, and ran off again. The Caldwell house in Newport Coast had glass walls and a view of the ocean. Ryan came home to it that evening in a silence so taut Amber felt it before she heard him. She was in the kitchen barefoot on the cold tile, opening a bottle of wine for the dinner she had cooked, because cooking gave her something to do in a house where she had begun to feel like a piece of furniture. He walked in without taking off his coat. He didn't look at her. "You didn't know who your sister was marrying?" he said, and the way he said it made it clear it was not a question. Amber set the corkscrew down. "Neither did you." He turned then, and for the first time in their entire history together, she saw what was actually behind his face. There was no charm in it. There was no tailored softness. There was only the cold, thwarted contempt of a man who had bet on the wrong piece, on the wrong board. "You should have known," he said. "You're her sister." It came out flat and unhedged, and in those 6 words, she heard the truth she had been refusing to look at since the night of the engagement party. To Ryan, she had never been the woman he had upgraded to. She had been the cheaper instrument that had served a purpose to humiliate Natalie, to buy himself a younger trophy, to make a point to a city that loved a public spectacle. She had thought she was winning. She had been a move on a board he had been playing alone. She did not finish opening the wine. She went upstairs and packed an overnight bag and drove to her mother's house. And somewhere on the freeway she began to cry, the deep structural kind of crying she had not done since she was a child. Carol was the one who opened the door. A week later, Amber knocked on Natalie's apartment door, without makeup and jeans, and a plain sweatshirt, with her hair pulled back. Daniel had taken Mason to a school event. Natalie answered with a dish towel still in her hand. Amber did not ask to come in. She stood on the welcome mat with her arms folded across her stomach, and the words she had clearly rehearsed came out in the wrong order. "I'm not here to ask you to forgive me. I don't think you should." Her eyes were red and stripped clean of pretense. "I came because I don't know what else to say. Ryan isn't who I thought he was, and I realized I didn't steal anything from you. I just picked up what you got out of." Natalie listened to all of it. She did not invite her in. "Go home, Amber." Her voice was even almost gentle. "Not because I'm angry. Because I don't have anything to give you right now." Amber nodded. She turned and walked back down the corridor, and for the first time in her life, she did not look back to see whether her sister was still watching. Carol called the next morning. What she did not say when Natalie picked up was that she had spent the previous night staring at her bedroom ceiling, putting 2 facts together, that the daughter she had pushed had picked the wrong man, and that the daughter she had told to be silent was now standing beside someone more powerful than the one she had lost. What had kept her awake was not the money. It was that Natalie had not called her, had not called to share a victory or a vindication or anything at all. Somewhere along the way, her older daughter had stopped counting her as a person to share things with. "I saw the news," Carol said, her voice unsteady. "I was wrong. The night of the party. Telling you to walk out the side. I told you to choose how it looked, and you chose who you were. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." Natalie heard her out. She closed her eyes against the sting at the bridge of her nose. "Okay, Mom," she said. "Not I forgive you not. It's all right because neither of those was yet true. Just okay." That was the door she could open today. The rest was a thing they would walk toward slowly over the years that were left to them. The annual charity gala in Beverly Hills came 8 weeks later. She wore a midnight blue gown without sequins or flourish her hair loose. Daniel wore a charcoal suit and no tie, the way he always wore one when he had to wear one at all. They walked into the room together, and the room recognized them in stages. First, the murmur, then the shift of bodies, then the discreet realignment of who was speaking to whom and where. Ryan was there with Amber on the far side of the ballroom. They were not holding hands. They were not really standing together at all. He approached eventually because not approaching would have been louder. He shook Daniel's hand with the smoothness of a man who had decided in advance how this would go, and said something about hoping there was no lingering awkwardness between any of them. Natalie looked at him for one long second before she answered. "What happened explained itself," she said. "I don't think we need to revisit it." Daniel's smile was small and unhostile. He shook Ryan's hand once more easily and said, "Wishing you wisdom in the next chapter." The room, listening sideways the way rooms always do, understood what that meant. The logistics firm where Natalie still worked grew quickly that year. Some of the new business came because clients had figured out that the woman cleaning up their books was married to a man whose buildings they wanted leases in. Most of it came because the system she had built actually worked. She ran the place with the same flat steadiness she had carried out of the worst night of her life, early and let out. No theatrics, no apologies. Cole Capital Group continued to expand. Daniel went back to his office in downtown Los Angeles 3 days a week, and on the other days, he worked from a small room at the back of a quieter house they had moved into together in an old neighborhood where the sidewalks buckled around tree roots and the neighbors knew everyone's first name. Saturdays, though, did not change. He still drove the old blue Ford. He still took Mason and Natalie to the same neighborhood coffee shop where the owner kept the corner table by the window for them and never once asked what either of them did for a living. The cinnamon rolls were still cut a little crooked. One afternoon, sitting across from her in that booth, Mason looked up from his hot chocolate and asked the question he had clearly been turning over for a while. "If you'd known Dad was rich back then, would you still have married him?" Natalie thought about it for a long moment. She did not give him a polished answer. He deserved a real one. "I don't know, Mason," she said finally. "But I'm glad I didn't know." He nodded, slow and serious the way he did, when something made sense at a level he could feel before he could explain it. He went back to his hot chocolate. Outside the window, a man in a wrinkled jacket was unlocking a bicycle from a rack. A woman with a stroller waited for the light. A teenage girl laughed into her phone. Ordinary people beginning ordinary days. Natalie watched them for a while. She thought about a garden in Newport Beach, a cold bottle of water against stone, a diamond dropped into a drawer she had never opened again. She thought about how the worst night of her life had walked her by a route she could not have planned into the best one. The lesson was simple in the end, and it had been waiting for her the whole time. Real strength was not the man you married. Real strength was who you stayed when there was nothing left to lose. The people who kept their dignity at the bottom were almost always the ones who turned out to deserve the top. She lifted her coffee. Daniel reached across the table and rested his hand over hers, not hiding it, not performing it, just there. The morning kept going on the other side of the glass.